All right. To move on, we are moving on to our last presenter. Please, just to the attendees, just sit tight. We'll have a final session, the Q&A session, where you'll be able to share your questions and your comments and make your voice heard. And so our final presenter, Valentine, Mr. Valentine Anaba. He also holds a Master of Science degree in Geoinformation Science. He is currently a Geospatial Analyst and Technical Advisor at GIZ Governance for Inclusive Development. His area of specialization includes data collection and processing, spatial analysis, digitization, 3D modeling, as well as spatial model building. Mr. Anaba, thank you so much for coming, and please take over.
Yes, thank you very much for having me. And I would like to say a big thanks to the presenters that came before me. So if you could kindly stop the presentation so that I share my screen.
All right, sure.
All right, so I'm sure by now all of you have seen the true potential of using GIS from the presentations that have been made earlier on. And I just want to also make my presentation re-emphasizing the power of GIS in our day-to-day activities and then what we can actually use it for. And most of my interactions as a technical advisor, one of the issues that I've realized is that people seem to be limited in using GIS either because they don't know the full potential of using GIS or don't have the skill or technical know-how on how to use GIS to do some of the basic activities that they can do within their area. Well, but before I proceed, I would like notification if you can see my screen.
Yes, we can clearly see your screen, sorry.
And if you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you clearly.
Hello.
Hello, Valentine. We can hear you clearly. You can proceed.
I'm not getting any feedback. Can you see my screen and can you hear me?
Hello, Valentine. Can you hear me? We can clearly hear you. Hello, Valentine.
Mr. Zoe.
Yes, we can hear you. Can you hear me? Hello?
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can hear you.
All right,
yes.
I wasn't getting any feedback.
Okay, sure. You can proceed.
Sure.
Yeah.
All right, so already from the presentations that have been made, you can tell that GIS actually plays an essential part of displaying and reporting issues in our day-to-day activities. And the focus of my presentation is going to be mainly on how to create simple databases that can be used for our day-to-day activities. I'll also be speaking on geoprocessing models and how to create them, and then also on 3D modeling. In this presentation, we'll look at all the ArcGIS suites, that's from ArcMap, ArcGlobe, ArcScene, then Azure City Engine, and how you can use all of those. Now, the first activity that I actually want to explain is the street naming and property addressing. This basically has to do with navigating within cities and urban areas. How do you get from one area to another? Now, for those who have used Uber or Google Maps before, in order to search for places, you've noticed that once a place is on the map, it's very easy for you to identify how to get there. But now the question in Ghana and most African countries is, how do you identify someone's property or the location of an individual by using the person's address? And this is one of the most difficult situations in the country. Now, in retrospect, if you ask someone in America for his address, he's just going to say Capitol Street, Lincoln Avenue, number 451. That's my house. And that's his address. Once you search for that on a map, you're easily able to find the place. You won't get missing. In England, he says Downing Street, plots 122, flat 8. And then you can go there. But in Ghana, if you want to give locations to your places, it's a very hectic activity. And in our place, this is how we give our introductions. As you are coming, you take the Okada man. When you reach here, you pass here, you turn to this corner. When you reach to this particular place, you see this place, you turn left, do as if you want to curve right, go here. And it's a whole facade of trying to give people directions to wherever you are. And this makes it very difficult to find locations. So in 2018, the government of Ghana, through the Ministry of Local Government, released a street naming and property addressing policy guide that aimed to ensure that all district assemblies created a database indicating the properties of the numbers and in the street names as a basis for creating addresses for each property. Now, what they did was there was a training. Each district was supposed to insert the signposts indicating the name of the road, and we're also supposed to create digital parcel maps and number each parcel on the plot that it is located on against the street where it is located. The districts have a satellite image, and what I have to do is delineate the boundary for each property. Now, you need to, this is actually a technical activity and it's done by the fiscal planning officers in the country. Now, once you've done that, you will identify the road network that leads to the place. So all roads will be named and all streets will be numbered. So if you take a closer look, this is the Independent Street. Now, with the numbering scheme, what happens is all properties to the right-hand side of the road take odd numbers, and all properties to the left-hand side of the road take even numbers. So where you have 1 right, you have 2 at the left, 3, 4, in that particular order. So now, if you want to give your address, all you need to do is mention the number of your plot and then the street that is against, and then that's how they'll be able to find you. So in this case, if I was at number 5 and I wanted to give someone my address, I'll just go like number 5 Independent Street, and that is my address. And now with the process that had been stated in the policy, you're not supposed to duplicate names. The numbers are unique. The ordering of the number is the same. And then it makes it very easy for you to identify where you're going because all streets are named and all properties are addressed. Now with the activity, the end product looks something like this. So you have a map showing the land uses, and each plot has an address. And then the adjoining street to that plot gives to the street name that creates the address for it. After to that, district assemblies collect information and they insert signages. They also collect information on the property info, the business information, and then the location. So they add information like the Ghana Post, they add the house numbers, and then we have the UPNs. Now, this data can be used for multitude of services, from service delivery and the rest. But currently in Ghana, this data is used for revenue mobilization, tracking and identification properties, and identification of properties, and then collecting revenue from properties. And in that sense, in the country, we have 100 districts that have actually created such databases and are using them. And earlier on in May, we had a training for the remaining 161 district assemblies in the country. So hopefully at the end of the year, each district assembly will have an address map that can be used for other things. As I made mention earlier, the data currently has been used to develop a web map that is called DLREF, and it's being used by the district assemblies. And they have 3 versions of it. They have the desktop app, which the officers easily use to track the location of properties and businesses. Then we also have the data collection app, which is used for data collection. Then we have the revenue collection app, which the revenue collectors use to track their location on the field, as well as also visit the parcel for their revenue activities. But with the exception of this, as I said, there's a high potential for that data to be used for other activities. So if we have any GIS enthusiasts that are actually here today and have tried doing stuff but haven't had access to data, because from the previous presentations, they have mentioned that data is an issue, haven't had access to data, but will want to try their hands on any of one of these projects, I will leave my contact behind after the presentation. You can get in touch with me, and I will either send the data to you directly or lead you to the officers responsible, and then leave a recommendation for them to leave the data with you so that you can try your hands on something and also work and explore around GIS. Now, moving from that aspect, the next aspect that I actually want to speak about is using GIS for spatial multi-criteria evaluations. Now, spatial multi-criteria evaluations is just automating the processes that you would normally run in a sequence or a chain so that you execute it as one tool. Now, one of the basic questions that I can use an example is when you want to rent an apartment, or when you want to build a house, or you want to start a business, what are some of the considerations that you take before you start? Do you just take any available land because it is there, or are they processes that you use? Now, normally in GIS, we have processes in calculating, estimating, modeling, and then processing to come out with final decisions. And sometimes this is usually a technical process that a lot of people don't understand how it works. But with geoprocessing models, you can actually put your tools together and then you run the analysis at once. So it executes the chain of analysis that you have had to run individually to come out with your response. Dr. Yumu displayed this and then explained a little bit of it, but I'll just explain how it works. So with GIS, you need data to execute to get an output. So in a normal geoprocessing or running a normal tool, what you need is your input data, you have your processing tool, it gives you your output. Now with geoprocessing models, what you do is you have a sequence of tools that are pegged together. So you have your input, process, output, and then you can use that output into another process for another output, or you can have a new input, a process, an output with your initial output. So in this particular scheme I've shown you, you're executing 3 different tools, but you're only providing 2 inputs. Now, one of the projects that we worked on was what is the best location for situating social facilities. District assemblies have always been behavioral with trying to identify the best place to put schools or provide health facilities. In most cases, when they have their plans, they prepare their medium-term development plans, their action plans, and they get to the community, their decision is always based on which location is provided for them to provide that particular facility. So you see, they go to the place, there's no spatial analysis, there's no spatial consideration. And then they just go and then the chief says, oh, this is the land, put it here. And in the long run, they provide the facility and the facility is not being used to the full potential that it was actually developed to be used. So in this case, we have a spatial multi-criteria evaluation model that is going to assess and then make the final decision or make recommendations of a decision that individuals can also take and incorporate their cultural, physical, and the sociological impact into to make the final decision. Now, in the model that was created, the data requirements were, and as you can see here, you needed topology data, the boundary of the area in question, road network, existing facilities, reserves, and the rest. Now, what is going to happen is, first of all, you want to make sure that when you're proposing a facility, you don't propose it in an area that is flood prone. And that is where the topology data comes in. And then I will explain when we get into detail. You also want to make sure that the place is accessible by road, and then you're not putting too many facilities at the center. And in most cases, you usually find a lot of facilities crowded within a particular area, serving a major population, but centered in an area where the major population cannot actually access. So in this case, we have a model here that executes over 17 different geoprocessing tools individually. Now, for someone who doesn't have the technical know-how and will want to execute and get to the same decision, what it means is the person will have to individually execute these tools. But when you have a geoprocessing model, you execute it once and it runs all the tools that have been kept in the model for you. So in our model, if you look at the top left-hand side, we use the topology data, which was in a vector file format, convert it to a raster file format to make our assessments and then identify our flood zones that are here. Then we also use the facility map or the facility data of existing facilities to create a buffer to identify the coverage zones of those particular facilities so that we don't place facilities within areas that already have access to that particular facility. Then what we do is we exclude that particular area from the area that we are planning. Then the next thing we do is we take the reserves, areas that are not supposed to be touched, say forest reserves or places with cultural or historic heritage. You take dams, floodplains, and the rest. You merge those. You create a buffer around those areas to prevent the facility from being settled or situated within those particular reserves. And in most cases, you come to places like Accra, you go over the north and other countries, and you realize that people are building facilities close to flood-prone areas. And the main reason is that is the space they have been provided. I have seen so many schools that have been built near dams, to the extent that sometimes it rains, and because of lack of proper assessment, the school or part of the school is flooded by the dam. And this is basically just because the school was placed too near to the dam, and there was no assessments to identify what is the floodable zone here. There was no buffer left for that particular area. So you have people building in that particular space. So you also, in the model, you incorporate other data sources like population to identify, okay, with this how many people don't have access, and where is the best location to provide so that those people that don't have access are able to have access. And the entire process is just to create an efficient and effective processing model and making a decision that improves spatial allocation, that improves accessibility to the facility. In most cases, you might also have to add cultural history and then other social parameters in making this calculation. But in our advice and our recommendation, we usually try to tell them that first of all, you need to find a suitable site. Then you can also go ahead and then make your further analysis to identify where you want to put that. Just to show you how this works, this model was run for the entire Upper East region. Now, on the map, what you can see is the Upper East region. The dots that you see is the location of existing health facilities. And then the red spasm you see on the map is actually the population. And then Facebook has an open source population data source. I can share that in the link afterwards so that those who also want to have access to it can easily download that. So from here, the first thing the model executes is identifying the flood zones by using the population data, the raster to topo fill, and then the other tools that were incorporated there to identify your flood zone based on the parameter you have specified. So in this particular case, based on the analysis, where you have the blue spot is where the flood zones in the area. And this has been ground truthed on field to identify that, yes, these are actually areas that get flooded when the rains come in severe. So what happens is you exclude the flood area from the entire planning area. This is to make sure that you don't put any facility within the flood area. And already on the map, you can see that there's a facility, or there are two facilities here that are very close to flood-prone areas. So if assessments were made properly, probably the first suggestion to put this facility here wouldn't have been the case. But there was an absence of proper assessment, and then that's what we have here. Now, the next thing is to calculate accessibility to the already existing facilities to make sure that we don't put too many facilities in the same place. Now, if you look at the buffer rings that have been created, you notice that there are a lot of overlaps. And if you wanted to take each of these facilities and especially distribute them, you notice that we have had major accessibility in all the places. But because of the nature of our planning and how facilities are sited, you have a lot of facilities located at an area that are providing services to the same population, while we have people outside that population group that don't actually have access to facilities. So the model also executes this. And this, I'm just showing you the outputs one by one. But if you were to run the model, it would have just given you the final decision. And that's what you use for the work. But if you're going to calculate it, this is the breakdown of each of the processes that are executed. So in calculating the coverage, it includes the reserve areas, the dam areas, it creates a buffer around all those, and then it excludes them from the map area. So in the long run, this is the results you're going to get. So what it means is all the areas that you see the brown patch are all areas that don't have access. But in community settlements, you always have a group of a settlement, and then you have bare space before you have the next settlement, except we're in highly urban areas where settlements are almost merging. But in rural and then in developing states, you always find that you have a settlement, you have bare space, you have another settlement. So we are just going to make a selection. We are going to select the area within where the red square is, and then we are going to go down. Now you see that you have patches of brown, and then you have red dots within those patches. So it means that within those spaces, we have areas that don't have access to facility. So if you look, we have squared the areas that we have S1, S2, S3, and S4. Now in S1, we have a total population of 1,064 people within that particular area. In S2, we have a total of 5,385. In S3, we have a total of 4,541. And in S4, we have a total of 1,078 people within that particular area. Now, based on the planning standards each country uses, or the country that, or the person who is running this model, you can identify what type of health facility to provide within the area, and then where to provide it. Now, the model usually takes the center of each block to identify the best location to provide the facility that will increase accessibility to that particular facility. So in this case, where you see the black dots are proposed locations, not final locations, but proposed locations where you can place the facilities to improve accessibility to populations that don't have access to health facilities. So this is the final result you get when you run the SMC model. I just broke it down and tried to explain what happens. But in a normal technical sense, if you were trying to perform an analysis like this, it means that you have had to execute all the 19 tools that were shown in the geoprocessing model. But because the geoprocessing model has been built, you execute it once. And this was done for Upper East region. If I want to do this in another region or in another district, I pick the same geoprocessing model that has been developed and I execute it again. If I go to another country, let's say I go to Nigeria, and then they have an assignment to find the best location for a particular facility, and they're using the same criteria, I just pick that same tool and I execute it again. So once the model is created, it comes as a tool in your toolbox that you can execute at a specific time or during a specific session to get the results that you want. We have created other spatial models that have been used in other activities, and then it has actually broken down the time that districts had to work on particular activities. With the street naming and property addressing activity, for instance, we created a model that allowed districts to complete work in 1 week when it usually took them like 2 months or 3 months to conclude just that digitization phase. But now there's a model that allows them to conclude it within 1 week. Once you execute the model and you have your data in the right format, it executes it for you. And then you are then able to use it to run over and over for different areas to get more specialized and strategized results. So this is the other power of GIS. You can create chain of activities to come out with your own specialized results and create tools which you can share with colleagues in different countries that they can use to also do other stuff. So from the data that had been shown today, from voting to incidents in other African countries, if there was a specific solution that would have needed to be taken and there was a need for specialized technical processes and people didn't know how to run this, but knew the output that they wanted, a spatial multi-criteria evaluation tool could have been created and shared to these people. So with the model I have right now, I can share it to anyone in the group here. And then you can also execute it in your district or in your area of jurisdiction. And it will also provide you with specified results for the area you have executed it in, provided you also use the same parameters that are provided within your area of jurisdiction. So that's another thing that I haven't seen a lot of people do, but it's something that is actually functional and helpful in executing day-to-day activities, especially when you're in the space of GIS and then handling technical activities. The last thing that I'd actually like to show you is 3D modeling, how it can be used for advanced visualization and modeling. So I will show you how we 3D in ArcScene. I'll show you how we 3D in ArcFlow, and then how you do 3D activities in HVCT engine. A lot of people have installed the ArcGIS suite, but have never used any of the ArcScene or ArcFlow. It's always ArcMap, but there's actually more power in the other tools that you don't use. It's something that I also like to show using some projects in areas that I have actually worked in. So this is an area in Kwebu. The developer had actually drawn this beautiful plan for the settlement, but when they went to implement, they noticed that the area was very hilly, so they couldn't salvage all the lands. So they wanted to find out where could they salvage land, where could they perform cut and fill, which lands could not be retrieved at all, and where could people actually build. Now, the thing is, when it comes to GIS, It usually takes an expert to understand what he's doing when he's viewing data in 2D. I just switched my, I hope you can see it. I'm now in ArcMap. So this is the same data that was created. Now, the normal preview of information is I load the data, I load my topo, and then I can see, okay, so this is the topography of the area. But unless you're an expert or you're a cartographer, it's very difficult for you to make sense of this, looking at contour lines and trying to identify which area is on a highland, whether it's on a hill, whether it's on a slope, and the rest. Now, in ArcGIS, you have the power to convert vector data elevation models usually give you a clearer picture of what it looks like. Now, I'm just going to topple a satellite image of the area in question here, and then you can see what it looks like. But it's still very difficult for someone to make sense of this, even though he has an image behind. Now, with the power of 3D with GIS, you can actually have a visual representation of what is on ground. In Google Earth, those of you who have used Google Earth and Google Pro, you have the street view. But with GIS too, you can also topple and then view your information in 3D to better visualize and understand what is happening, and also let it interact with other data that you have. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to convert this topo data into what we call a TIN. It's a triangulated irregular network. It's a 3D format that allows you to actually see the undulations of the topography of the place. And I'm going to switch to ArcScene now so that we can see the area. Now, this is an ArcScene. And in ArcScene, I am able to move around and then identify where or see the elevation of the places clearly. Now, if I come this way, you can actually see what is happening in terms of topography. Now, in 2D, you don't usually get the full sense of the topography. Specialists can read it, they can explain it to you, but you don't actually get the full sense. But with 3D, you're able to see the data for what it is on the ground, and then you're also able to interact with the data. Now I'm going to overlay the same data I showed you in the previous map, and then we see what happens here. So zoom to layer, and then here we have the same parcel I was showing you, and you can see what is happening here. So you notice in ArcMap, the parcel looked flat and everything was flat. We loaded our topo data on it, trying to read it. But then again, it was very hard to see what was happening. But now in 3D, you can actually load your topo data with whatever existing map you have to get a full visual understanding of the terrain and what happens within that particular terrain. Now, I'm just going to deactivate this, and then I'm going to deactivate this and load the satellite image. So now with the satellite image, you can actually see where the buildings are located on that particular plane. And you can actually see the true topo of the place. Now, this is something you don't get to see in 2D graph representation. Now, there are other things you can actually do here apart from viewing data. You can actually model and also simulate data in this particular scene. And what I'm going to show you is a flat simulation using data parameters of high water rise and then low water rise within the particular area. And with these particular simulations, you don't actually have to use existing data, but you can simulate the data with your own parameters to identify, in the worst case scenario, which people actually get affected. And then where does the water flow to? Dr. Yomo had explained this, and then in an image, he explained causes of flood, where you had the image, you had the value, you had the blockages, and the rest actually explained this. So what I'm going to do is, I've created an animation within ArcScene, and I'm now going to simulate the flood. So you notice that in cases of flood, these are the areas that get flooded, and that's the valley. And in the worst scenario, if it's getting, the flood is increasing, you're able to identify which houses are going to be affected. And this you will see when the simulation or the video returns. So you notice as the gullies get filled, these houses at the edge are the ones that are going to be severely affected. Now we could increase the parameter of this particular flood simulation to see what's the worst events that will happen if the flood continues. But now with 3D, with modeling, you can actually follow the terrain. So you can see that this is the gully where the water passes and it exits here. So the water comes this way, passes here, and exits down to this particular scope. And this 3D visualization actually can tell you, well, if you want to cut and fill, which are the areas you should cut and which are the areas you should fill. And if you want to improve drainage, which areas should you consider? And before you cut and fill, what are the consequences that will actually happen? Because if I decide to cut the top of the hill and fill here, what it means is there will be no space for water to run. And then I'll end up blocking the passage that the water passes to get out of the area. And this has been one of the major issues when it comes to planning within our physical space. Because people lack the technical know-how to properly plan, these are some of the things that happen. And due to the nature of development, sometimes we try to estimate flood, we try to project flood, we try to model flood, and sometimes we don't get the data right, probably because of how we are visualizing the data. So with GIS, with ArcScene to be specific, you can also do this with the ArcGIS Pro. You're able to model in 3D topographically to see how situations actually exist on the ground. And then you're also able to model other activities like flood and the rest. So this is the first instance of 3D modeling. Now, the second instance of 3D modeling is in the space of urban planning. Now, people try to describe and then display data as footprints to identify locations. I already showed you the first instance of the street naming and property addressing. Now, you could incorporate that data with your already available 2D data and then create a visual 3D data that actually shows how activities are on the ground. Now, here, what you're looking at is a 3D of Bolga Municipal. This is where I have the most comprehensive data, so I'm using this as an example. But we also have data for other places, but only that you don't have the height attribute in the attribute table. So when you're creating data within your attribute table, you can actually specify the area that you want to use for your height. In this case, it was captured as number of floors in this particular data. So we use the number of floors to project and extrude the building in its 3D nature to show how it looks on ground. Now, for surveyors and engineers, this actually plays a very, an architect, it plays a good role for planning and executing of the activities. Now, you can actually export data from AutoCAD, Chief Architect, SketchUp into ArcScene, your full project. So if you've designed, say, a cathedral or a school, and you wanted to see how it would place within the area that you have selected for your planning, you can actually import that into ArcScene or even ArcGlobe, and then it will show you what your project is going to look like in interaction with the other facilities. In Ghana, I don't think anyone has been sued yet for building a story building in front of a short building without any permission. But in other countries, before you can actually build a structure, you need to identify whether you are blocking the sight or view of any of your residents or whether you're blocking anything. And when it comes to weather forecasting, wind directions, and those type of analysis, your 3D modeling actually helps you identify where not to put some facilities and where to put some facilities. And this, when rendered properly, can be used in other softwares for various analysis too. So this is ArcGlobe, and whatever you do in ArcGlobe, you can do in ArcScene, but just that ArcGlobe allows you to do it on a much bigger scale. So if I wanted to work on data for the entire Ghana, I could load it in ArcGlobe and then it will work fine. But if I load it in ArcScene, it will crash. And Google has already released, Google and Microsoft has released data on building footprints for countries. So that too can be shared in the link so that you can actually download that and also get interactive and experiment. The last thing I would like to show you is using City Engine. Now, City Engine recently has been moved to GIZ Urban on their online platform. But City Engine is one of the most robust tools that you can use in visualizing cities and their current nature, and then use it for planning. This is more helpful for those who are in architecture, urban planning, survey, and engineering. Now you can actually create a scene from blank. You can extract data from OpenStreetMaps or the SU Life Atlas, and you can also create your own imaginary city. And recently I posted something on my status on a Saudi Arabia project where they are trying to create a city called Inline. And it's a city that spans about 100 and something kilometers stuck on top. It's a very beautiful city. For those of you who have time, you can just go on YouTube and then search for the concept Inline, the urban city Saudi Arabia project Inline, and you can get what I'm trying to explain. And with a software like City Engine, you can actually simulate or create a project similar to that, and then see how you can interact with that particular settlement, and also identify how, if you're going to lay it in space, it's going to interact. I would have liked to walk us through the stage-by-stage process on how to do this, but the issue with City Engine is that it uses a language we call CGA. So CGA is a rule-based grammar language that is used by City Engine to create your 3D visual effects. But for those who are in architecture and engineering and have used SketchUp before, you have that full incorporation of SketchUp in City Engine. So it allows you to create your shapes, you pull them out, you can draw your windows, put your doors, and have everything in the software. The same way, like in ArcGroup, you can also create it in your AutoCAD or your preferred engineering software, and then you also pull it into City Engine, and then you can work with it. So this is one of the most robust tools I've actually worked with in the space of 3D and modeling 3D activities. Okay, so we need to wait for it to load. So here already, you can see what the buildings look like. You can see the roof. In ArcGroup, you couldn't see the roof, but in City Engine, you can model the roofs. You can put the windows in there. If you look at the structure, you can see the windows are in there. And you can actually model down to the road. So I can zoom in here and you can see there's a stop on the road. We have the yellow lines. There's actually a traffic light here, yes, to model and include it, but it tells you where to turn right, where to stop, after the traffic rules and engagements exactly in here. So you can create your own shape files, you can draw them in here, and then you can interact with them. So with City Engine, you have the full balance of creating your own urban settlement in actuality in what it looks like. And this is what the CGA language looks like. So if you look at the left right-hand corner, you have to create your CGA rule and specify which attributes it should pick, what it should apply to that particular attribute, what, for instance, roof, and I put color 25500, and that is what is making the roof red. But if I set or I change the color here, I can run the model again and then give it a different color. I can add my streets, I can plant, I can actually insert trees and model the trees as they are on the ground, like create my whole 3D tree and create the entire settlement. The interesting thing about City Engine is that you can export your data into other softwares, interoperability. So if you have one of these, this is a 3D headset for visualization, you put it on and you connect it to your PC. You can actually interact with the system and it looks like you're walking on the ground, but you need one that has a sensing motion to move. And currently this data has been exported into another software. A colleague is actually developing a game called Choco Drift, and he wants the game to actually mimic Accra. So we had to create an entire 3D city model of Accra, the elevation of Accra, the runabout, the circle, and then the rest. And that is currently being used in the development of the game. I can't show you that particular data because of I didn't get permission from you to show you that particular data, but you can actually create stuff from City Engine or from your ArcGIS and export it to other softwares and then use it for remarkable work. So there are a lot of stuff you can do with GIS, specifically ArcGIS, and the other GIS software, but I also felt that it would be good to share this knowledge with you so that you understand that there is no limit to the work you can do with GIS, provided you have your data in the right format. And some of you have data, and a lot of people have data, but don't actually know to what extent they can use the data. So I will stop my presentation here so that we can close early. Already the meeting was supposed to have ended by now, but because of the time delays, we are still here. So thank you very much for your attention, and then hopefully in the Q&A session, if there are any questions for me, I'll respond to them. Thanks very much.